Queen Eleanor walked straight past the dignitaries, past her own aides, and stopped in front of the royal guard. "Salute your queen," she ordered, but the guard completely ignored her, didn't so much as even blink. And when she pushed harder in front of the whole courtyard, his reply didn't just stop her cold. It brought up a name she never expected to hear again. The February air hung sharp and still over London, the kind of cold that cuts through wool coats and makes tourists huddle closer together behind the rope barriers. The sky was a sheet of grey steel, heavy with the weight of winter and secrets that had been buried far too long. To the assembled crowd, it was a day of familiar pageantry. Another formal welcome, another procession of dark cars, another chance to glimpse the choreographed precision of the monarchy. They raised their phones, hoping to capture something worth posting, unaware that the history of this day would not be written in press releases. But in the silence between a queen and her guard, Staff Sergeant Alistair Vance stood at the eastern edge of the forecourt as if carved from the same ancient stone as the palace behind him. 41 years old, tall and lean beneath the imposing black bearskin that added a foot to his height. His scarlet tunic was pressed so sharp you could have cut paper on its creases, every brass button catching the pale light like a tiny, winking eye. But the stillness he projected was not merely ceremonial. Vance had earned his composure in places where a flicker of an eyelid at the wrong moment meant death. He had stood checkpoint duty in the dust-choked plains of Afghanistan, where the only warning of an attack was the sudden absence of sound. He had maintained his post during mortar strikes in the Balkans, his body a fixed point in a world dissolving into chaos. This, however, was a different kind of battlefield. The motorcade glided through the palace gates with practiced smoothness. The central car, a gleaming black Bentley, came to a gentle stop. A liveried footman opened the door, and Queen Eleanor stepped out. She wore a tailored coat of deep emerald green, her hat positioned at the perfect angle, her expression the carefully calibrated smile she had worn to thousands of such events. She moved through the small reception line with the grace of a dancer following steps she'd known her entire life. A handshake, a murmured pleasantry, a polite nod to the diplomatic guests who had been waiting in the cold. She gave a brief wave to the crowd, generating the expected ripple of cheers and camera clicks. Then her gaze swept across the line of ceremonial guards. It stopped on Vance. A flicker of something, not recognition, but assessment, passed through her eyes. It was a look he knew well, though no one else in the world would have caught it. For a moment, the Queen of the United Kingdom was gone, and in her place was the woman he had made a pact with in a rain-lashed Scottish safe house more than 2 decades ago. The planned route had her moving straight to the palace entrance, but she changed direction. It was a subtle deviation, but in the world of royal protocol, it was a seismic shift. Her aides, caught off guard, hurried to adjust. The crowd sensed it instantly. A collective intake of breath, a sudden focusing of thousands of eyes. Phones that had been lowering were raised again. Queen Eleanor walked directly to Alistair Vance. She stopped in front of him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him beneath the towering bearskin. The air between them crackled. "I believe a queen is due a salute from her guard, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was calm, yet it carried across the forecourt, clear and sharp in the winter air. Vance did not move. He did not blink. The plume on his bearskin ruffled in the breeze, but the man beneath it might as well have been made of granite. His eyes remained fixed on an invisible point somewhere beyond the crowd. Her smile did not waver, but a new, harder edge entered her tone. "Perhaps you didn't hear me. I said, salute your queen." Still, nothing. The silence stretched, becoming its own entity, heavy and profound. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. This wasn't part of the show. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "This is not the time for insubordination. Sergeant, you are on duty. Do as I have instructed." The silence held. It was an answer in itself. Behind her, an aide shifted uncomfortably, but a sharp glance from the senior protocol officer froze him in place. "You did not interrupt the queen. Ever." And that's when her patience, the public performance of it, finally cracked. Her voice rose, pitched for the entire courtyard to hear, each word a shard of ice. "Is this how the household division now conducts itself? Standing mute in the face of the crown?" She straightened to her full height. "I am certain that ceremonial respect is not optional. A simple salute is all that is required." Show the people that their queen is respected. This was it, the moment of activation. Vance's immobility had been the alert. Her public confrontation was the confirmation that she had seen it. Now came the exchange. For the first time since she'd approached him, Vance's posture changed. It was an infinitesimal shift. A slight tightening of his jaw. A slow, deliberate blink. Then he spoke. His voice was low, yet it carried with an unnerving clarity. Devoid of emotion but weighted with significance. My duty is to the crown, he said, his gaze never wavering, and to the promise of Larkspur. Larkspur. The name hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. To the crowd, it was a bizarre, nonsensical word. A woman's name? A place? But to Eleanor, it was a key turning a lock that had been rusting for 25 years. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in her stomach, but her expression remained a mask of imperious fury. Larkspur. The code word they had created as a last resort. A protocol for a threat so deep within the establishment that no official channel could be trusted. A threat that was not just aimed at the monarchy as an institution, but at her, personally. It meant the enemy was not at the gates, they were already inside. Her mind raced, a torrent of memory and calculation hidden behind her furious glare. She saw a darkened room in a remote castle. Rain lashing against the windows. She was not yet queen. Just a senior royal navigating the treacherous currents of the court. He was a young, sharp-eyed corporal in her security detail. They had stumbled upon something by accident, a file, a ledger, a whispered conversation. That spoke of a shadow network within the government. A cabal of powerful figures who believed the monarchy needed pruning. They called themselves the regents. Their purpose was to remove any royal they deemed a liability. A threat to their vision of a streamlined, controllable state. They had orchestrated accidents and scandals before. They had no one to trust. So they had created their own system. Larkspur. A flower beautiful and deadly poisonous. It had 3 stages. Stage 1, the refusal. A public, inexplicable breach of protocol from Vance. It was the siren, the flare in the dark. Threat is active, eyes open. She had just received stage 2, the name. The utterance of Larkspur. It meant the threat was not just active, but immediate, present, in this very courtyard. Now, she had to initiate stage 3. She had to get the intelligence. The public confrontation was her cover. Her fury was the smokescreen behind which her mind worked with chilling precision. Larkspur? She repeated, her voice dripping with contemptuous disbelief. The crowd leaned in, utterly captivated. Are you delirious, Sergeant? Or merely insolent? This was the coded question. Who is the target? Vance remained silent. The protocol for this was clear. Silence meant the primary target was her. A slight cough would have meant the target was a member of her family. A shift of his rifle would have meant a foreign dignitary. His absolute stillness was her own death sentence being read aloud. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage of protocol and whalebone. But her voice remained steady, even gaining in strength. You disgrace your uniform, she spat, taking a half-step closer. You disgrace the memory of every soldier who has stood on this ground. The new question. Who is the asset? Who is the threat? Vance's eyes, locked on that distant point, made the barest, most imperceptible shift. A flicker, less than a millimeter to the left. Then back. It was a movement so minute that only someone looking for it. Someone who had practiced this very signal in a drafty Scottish hall 2 decades ago. Could have seen it. Her own gaze followed the line he had indicated. It wasn't pointed at a hulking bodyguard or a suspicious figure lurking in the shadows. It was directed at the diplomatic reception line. Specifically, at the delegation from the small, wealthy European Republic of San Marino. The ambassador, a man with a genial face and silver hair named Lorenzo Costa. Beside him, his cultural attaché, a sharp-featured woman in a gray suit, Isabella Rossi, and standing just behind them, their aide, a young, forgettable man holding a briefcase. San Marino. It seemed impossible. A neutral, almost ceremonial nation, but the Larkspur file had mentioned them. A key hub for untraceable financial transactions. A quiet place for powerful people to meet. A perfect front. The final piece. She needed to know the method. I will see to it you are removed from this post before the hour is out, she declared, her voice ringing with royal authority. Your career in the household division is over. Do you understand me, Sergeant? The question. What is the delivery system? Weapon, bomb, or something else? For the first time, Vance's right hand, resting in its perfect ceremonial position, moved. He did not raise it. He did not shift his grip. He simply extended his index finger, just a fraction, and lightly tapped the polished wood of his rifle stock. Once, twice. The signal was brutally clear. Poison, contact-based or aerosolized. 2 agents. 2 of them, the ambassador and the attaché? Or one of them and the aide with the briefcase? The briefcase. It was the most likely delivery system. An aerosolized toxin, released when she shook the aide's hand, or as he passed her in the receiving line inside. Odorless, colorless, and fatal within minutes. It would look like a sudden heart attack or an aneurysm. Tragic, but natural. No fuss. The regent's signature style. The entire exchange had taken less than 90 seconds. To the world, it was a shocking display of lèse-majesté. A soldier disrespecting his queen. A brewing scandal. But in reality, it was a masterpiece of covert communication performed on the world's most public stage. Eleanor now possessed all the information she needed. Target. Her. Assets. The San Marino delegation. At least 2 of them. Method. A fast-acting poison. Likely in the aide's briefcase. Her mind, which had been a whirlwind of analysis, now became unnervingly calm. The fear was gone, replaced by cold, hard resolve. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times over the years, hoping it would never come. Now that it was here, she found herself ready. She gave Vance one last, withering look. It was a look of pure, undiluted fury, but in it, for a fraction of a second, was a different message. A message of gratitude, of trust, of command. Message received. I have control. He would have seen it. He, who could see a millimeter shift in her gaze from 100 feet away. We are finished here, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that was more terrifying than her shouting had been. Without another word, she pivoted on her heel. The turn was sharp, precise, military in its execution. Her aides, who had been frozen in a state of horrified paralysis, scrambled to fall in behind her. They saw a queen who had been publicly humiliated, retreating in anger. They were wrong. She was not retreating, she was advancing. As Queen Eleanor turned, the courtyard seemed to exhale. The invisible string of tension that had connected her to Staff Sergeant Vance snapped. And the world rushed back in. The murmur of the crowd became a low roar of disbelief and speculation. The clicks of cameras intensified, ravenous for the image of their queen's retreat. Her aides, their faces a mixture of panic and professional blankness, moved to form a protective bubble around her, shielding her from the prying lenses. To them, this was a disaster, a public relations nightmare unfolding in real time. They saw a monarch wounded, her authority challenged, her composure shattered. They saw a victim. They did not see the predator. Eleanor's mind was a storm of cold, clear logic. The public fury was a cloak of invisibility. The humiliation was a weapon. She walked not toward the grand entrance of the palace, the designated kill zone, but at a sharp diagonal, heading toward a lesser-used archway leading to the private East Gardens. Your Majesty, her private secretary, a nervous man named Philip, murmured, trying to gently steer her back toward the planned route. The reception is this way. The dignitaries can wait, Eleanor snapped, her voice carrying the brittle edge of her performance. The air in here is foul. I require a moment. Her personal protection officer, Marcus Thorne, a former SAS commander with eyes that missed nothing, fell into step beside her. He had been with her for 15 years. He knew her moods, her tells, her rhythms. He knew this anger was real. But he also sensed something else beneath it. Something sharp and focused that didn't align with simple outrage. Her choice of the word, foul, was a subtle flag. A low-level alert code they had established years ago. It meant a non-specific environmental threat. He subtly touched the earpiece in his ear, his posture shifting from ceremonial escort to active guardian. The East Gardens are not secured for an impromptu visit. Ma'am, Philip protested, his voice strained. Then secure them, Philip, Eleanor retorted without breaking her stride. Or would you prefer I remain here to be further insulted by my own guards? The threat was a perfect piece of misdirection. It cemented the narrative of her being upset by Vance, giving her a flawless reason to deviate from the schedule. There was no arguing with it. Philip immediately began speaking into his wrist, relaying the Queen's new, unexpected command. Security teams would be scrambling. Eleanor's eyes scanned the diplomatic line she was now walking past. Lorenzo Costa, the ambassador of San Marino, watched her approach with an expression of practiced sympathy. Isabella Rossi, his attaché, looked concerned. The young aide with the briefcase stood just behind them, his face a perfect mask of youthful deference. He was the one, the trigger. The assassins were now in a dilemma. Their plan relied on the predictable flow of protocol, on the quiet moment inside the palace where they could deploy their weapon. Eleanor was dragging them off the map. They could abort, but that would mean failing their shadowy masters, the regents, or they could follow, believing they could adapt. Pride and necessity would force them to follow. Eleanor stopped directly in front of Ambassador Costa. His sympathetic smile widened. "Your Majesty, a most unfortunate incident. Please, do not let the actions of one man." "On the contrary, Ambassador," Eleanor cut him off, her tone suddenly shifting from icy fury to a conspiratorial warmth that was even more disorienting. "The man has inadvertently done me a favor. He has reminded me that one must not be a slave to routine." She tapped the ambassador's arm with a gloved finger. "The gardens are so lovely this time of year. Even in the cold, you must join me. I wish to hear all about the new cultural initiative in San Marino." It was a royal command disguised as a whimsical invitation. Refusal was impossible. Costa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "It would be our greatest honor. Your Majesty." "Excellent." Eleanor beamed. She glanced past him, her gaze falling on the attaché and the aide. "And your charming staff, of course. We mustn't leave them out in the cold." She had them. She had hooked the entire cell and was now reeling them into her own chosen territory. As she began walking again, with the San Marino delegation now in tow, she allowed a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand. Marcus, walking at her left, would have seen it. It was another signal, escalating the alert. Fred is proximate and mobile. They passed through the archway into the East Gardens. Here, the noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the crunch of gravel underfoot and the whisper of wind through dormant rose bushes. The space was more open, with fewer places to hide, but also fewer escape routes. A handful of palace security, looking flustered, were fanning out, trying to form a perimeter on the fly. They were loyal, but they were not in the loop. They were pieces on the board. And Eleanor was the only one who knew the rules of the game. She led the small procession down a gravel path toward a stone bench near a large, ornate fountain that was silent for the winter. The aide with the briefcase stayed a respectful few paces behind the ambassador. Eleanor could feel his presence like a cold spot on her back. The poison was there, in that leather case, waiting for the right moment. A cough, a staged stumble, the opening of the case to retrieve a document. That's all it would take. She needed to force his hand now. In a controlled space, under Marcus's watchful eye. "Ambassador, you were telling me about the Verrocchio sculpture you were hoping to loan." She began, her voice light and conversational. She gestured toward the stone bench. As she did, she let her expensive leather glove slip from her hand. As if by accident, it fell to the gravel path, landing directly between her and the young aide. It was a tiny, mundane event. But in the hyper-aware world of royal security, it was a thunderclap. Every protocol officer, every PPO, is trained for the dropped object scenario. It is a classic diversion, a moment where the principal is vulnerable. Their attention focused downwards. Marcus was already moving before the glove hit the ground. But Eleanor didn't bend to retrieve it. She kept her eyes locked on the aide. The young man, seeing the glove, instinctively took a step forward to pick it up for her. The perfect picture of a helpful subordinate. His right hand started to move towards the clasps of the briefcase. Perhaps to set it down, or perhaps to open it slightly as he bent over, releasing the toxin. This was the moment. "No, no, please," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly sharp and clear, stopping him in his tracks. "You mustn't trouble yourself." She turned her full attention to him, her smile gone, replaced by an expression of intense, unnerving focus. "You are Mr.?" The aide froze, his hand hovering over the briefcase. He was not expecting to be addressed directly. He was supposed to be invisible. "Bellini, Your Majesty. Marco Bellini. Mr. Bellini," Eleanor said, her voice smooth as silk. "That briefcase. It looks terribly important. And heavy." She paused, letting the silence stretch. Ambassador Costa and his attaché exchanged a fleeting, panicked glance. They could feel the script tearing apart. "My own staff complains endlessly about the weight of their papers. One worries about the strain." She looked from the briefcase to Marcus. It was a direct, unambiguous transfer of command. "Marcus," she said, her tone deceptively casual, "perhaps you could relieve Mr. Bellini of his burden. We can't have our guests encumbered while they enjoy the garden." It was a brilliant move. A polite, reasonable request that was, in fact, an inescapable trap. If Bellini handed over the case, he was finished. The weapon would be secured, and he would be detained. If he refused, he would be confirming he was a threat. Right here, in front of a dozen witnesses, including the Queen's chief bodyguard. For a terrifying second, Bellini's eyes darted left and right. He was cornered. His calm facade crumbled, revealing a raw, desperate panic. His fingers tightened on the handle of the briefcase. He took a half-step back. It was all Marcus needed. He didn't shout. He didn't draw his weapon. He moved with a speed that was terrifying in its economy. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, his left hand clamping down on Bellini's wrist, the one holding the briefcase. With crushing force, his right hand seized the back of the young man's neck. There was a sharp, downward shove. Bellini hit the gravel with a cry of pain and surprise. The briefcase clattered to the ground. Simultaneously, two other plain-clothed officers, who had been part of Eleanor's wider detail and had moved in the second she dropped her glove, materialized and were on him, pinning him to the ground. It was over in less than 3 seconds. It was brutally efficient and utterly silent. Ambassador Costa and Isabella Rossi were frozen in shock, their faces ashen. They had just watched their entire operation disintegrate before their eyes. Eleanor didn't even glance at the subdued aide. She bent down, with the slow, deliberate grace only she could muster, and picked up her own glove. As she straightened, she looked directly at Ambassador Costa. Her expression was no longer angry or warm. It was something far more frightening, absolute, glacial control. "It seems your aide is unwell, Ambassador," she said, her voice calm. "How very distressing. My security will see that he gets the attention he requires." Sir Julian Finch, the head of palace security, was now jogging toward them, his face pale, speaking urgently into his radio. He had seen the takedown, but he had no context. He saw a foreign diplomatic aide being violently subdued at the Queen's feet. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" he asked, his voice breathless. "I am perfectly fine, Sir Julian," Eleanor replied, dusting off her glove. "There appears to have been a minor security issue with the San Marino delegation. Please extend my apologies to our other guests for the delay." She then looked past him, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Marcus had the briefcase. The aide was being discreetly but firmly escorted away. The ambassador and his attaché were standing like statues, trapped in the web she had woven. "Sir Julian," she continued, her voice dropping so only he could hear, "take Ambassador Costa and Ms. Rossi to the blue drawing room. Place a guard on the door. They are not to speak to anyone. I suspect they may have important information regarding the sudden illness of their colleague. This is a matter of state security now. No communication in or out until you hear from me directly." She had done it. In the space of 5 minutes. She had used her own public humiliation as a smokescreen, identified the threat, isolated the assassins, neutralized the weapon, and taken the ringleaders into custody. All without revealing the existence of Larkspur or the true nature of the conspiracy. She had turned the courtyard into a chessboard and checkmated her opponents before they even knew they were playing her game. As she turned to walk back toward the palace, her stride was confident, her posture regal. The mask of the wounded queen was gone. In its place was the true monarch, a woman who had just stared into the face of her own death and had not flinched. From the forecourt, if he had been able to turn his head, Staff Sergeant Alistair Vance would have felt the shift in the atmosphere. The threat had passed. His queen was safe. His silent, 25-year-old promise had been kept. The gambit had worked. The walk back to the palace was the longest of Queen Eleanor's life. Each crunch of gravel under her heel was a drumbeat marking the seconds since the crisis had been averted. Her retinue buzzed around her, a frantic hive of whispered conversations and worried glances. They saw her rigid posture, the severe line of her mouth, and assumed it was the aftershock of public humiliation. They couldn't see the intricate calculations still running behind her eyes, the mental checklist of threats neutralized and new battle lines being drawn. Inside, she did not retreat to her private apartments. She swept into the palace's central command room, a place rarely seen by anyone outside the highest echelons of security. Sir Julian Finch and Marcus Thorne were already there, their faces grim. On a monitor, a live feed showed Ambassador Costa and Isabella Rossi sitting in the blue drawing room, silent and pale, with two stoic guards outside the door. "Report," Eleanor commanded, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The aide, Bellini, is in custody at a secure MI5 location," Marcus stated, his tone flat and professional. The briefcase contained a custom-designed aerosol device. The substance is a potent nerve agent, derivative of Novichok, colorless, odorless, fatal in under a minute. Our initial assessment is that it was designed to mimic a massive coronary event. Eleanor nodded slowly. Just as the Larkspur file had predicted, the regents were clinical, precise, and pathologically averse to messy evidence. "And Staff Sergeant Vance?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the monitor showing the forecourt. He was still there, a statue in red and black, as if nothing had happened. "Awaiting your orders, ma'am," Sir Julian said carefully. "The press corps is in a frenzy. The story of his insubordination is already the leading headline on every news site. They are calling it the greatest royal scandal in a generation." "Good," Eleanor said, a statement that stunned Sir Julian into silence. "Let them have their scandal. It's the perfect cover." She turned away from the monitor to face them. "Here are your orders. You will leak to a trusted press contact that Sergeant Vance is a decorated veteran who has been struggling with stress related to his past service. His actions today were a result of a regrettable personal crisis. The Crown is deeply concerned for his welfare and will ensure he receives the best possible care. Away from the pressures of public duty." She looked directly at Marcus. "You will personally oversee his care. He is to be transferred to the Balmoral estate tonight. A quiet administrative post. He is to be treated with the utmost respect. No one questions him. No one debriefs him. He is under my personal protection. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, a flicker of deep understanding in his eyes. It was not a punishment, it was an honorable exile. The safest place in the kingdom for the man who had just saved her life. "As for our guests in the blue drawing room," Eleanor continued, her voice hardening, "I will speak with the ambassador myself. Alone." "Ma'am, that is highly inadvisable," Sir Julian began, but the look Eleanor gave him silenced him instantly. When she entered the blue drawing room, Ambassador Costa rose, his face a mask of manufactured concern. "Your Majesty, this is a terrible misunderstanding. My aide is a troubled young." "Sit down, Lorenzo," Eleanor said, her use of his first name a verbal slap. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked to the fireplace and stood before it, her back to the flames. "The game is over. The regents have failed. Tell your masters that Larkspur sends its regards." The color drained from Costa's face. He collapsed back into his chair as if his bones had turned to dust. The name, the one they believed no one knew. The name of their own shadow network, spoken by the woman they had intended to murder, broke him completely. He had been a player in a grand, secret war, and he had just learned that his opponent had been holding the rulebook all along. Eleanor didn't need a confession. His terror was all the confirmation she required. Hours later, as dusk settled over London, Staff Sergeant Alistair Vance was quietly relieved of his post. He was not marched away in disgrace but was met by a single, plain-clothed officer, Marcus Thorne. As he was led through a quiet palace corridor, away from all eyes, he passed a long gallery window. Across the quadrangle, on the first floor, a light was on in the Queen's private study. She was standing there, looking out, not at him, but at the darkening city. As he watched, she raised a hand and subtly adjusted the emerald green brooch on her lapel. It was a gesture no one else would notice. A tiny, insignificant movement, but to Vance, it was a salute, a silent acknowledgement, a promise kept. A mission accomplished. He walked on into the shadows, his face betraying no emotion. The weight of 25 years finally lifted from his shoulders. He had stood his ground. And his queen stood safe. In her study, Eleanor looked down at the captured briefcase, now sealed in an evidence container on her desk. It was a symbol of the war she was forced to fight in the shadows. The crown was not just a symbol of power, it was a burden. A lonely sentry post she could never leave. She had won this battle. But the regents were still out there, a poison in the veins of her kingdom. And she would be ready for them when they struck again. The stillness of the palace was a temporary peace, hard won in the cold light of day by a silent guard and a queen who knew that true power was not in demanding respect, but in commanding a loyalty that transcended all protocol.